everyone. Thanks for joining us here on the Armed with Reason podcast, brought to you by GVpedia. When we began this podcast last summer, hard to believe it's been that long so far, one of the main motivators of starting the podcast was to give survivors of gun violence a space to share their stories and the work that they are involved in. So this week, Devin and I are very grateful to have Oronde McClain here on the podcast with us. Oronde is a gun violence survivor and advocate, motivational speaker, media consultant, and a mentor. He has dedicated the past 20 years of his life to supporting victims and working with the media to advance accurate and empathetic reporting on gun violence incidents. Oronde is the award-winning author of the book PTSD Won't Define Me and a co-producer of the documentary They Don't Care About Us, or Do They? And he's been featured in the Philadelphia Inquirer, Daily News, and Why for his gun violence advocacy efforts, and has built trusted relationships with many of Philadelphia's journalists. So first, Oronde, we'd like to thank you for joining us here today, finding some time in your busy schedule to chat with us. And welcome to the podcast.
Well, no, thank you. The pleasure is all mine.
And just to start off, we'd like to give you some time if you just want to tell us a little bit about what brought you into the work that you're doing.
Okay, so the work I've been doing, well, it's not like a work. It's like my life path. So April 3rd, I got shot in the back of the head. And it really like changed my life. Um I was in a coma for 7.5 weeks. I had to learn how to walk, talk all over again. I used to be right-handed, now I'm left-handed. And when I woke up out the coma, I was speaking Latin, and I never spoke Latin a day in my life. And if you could ask me today one word about Latin, I would know nothing about it. And it was like a hard change because I was 10 when I got shot, and it was in a great neighborhood, so it was like shocking to Philadelphia. I moved from a bad neighborhood to a good neighborhood. Like, for instance, I didn't have no trees on my block, and I moved to Mount Airy. I had trees on my block. Total shock, and then now
Right.
I get shot in the head. Um, you know, and it's hard. I tried to commit suicide over 22 times. And the last time I was like, you know what? I'm here for a reason. God brought me back for one purpose and one purpose only, and it was trying to change survivors' lives. Because we don't get the, how can I say, the glory and not say the glory, we don't get recognize the recognition that we deserve. Like, for instance, somebody gets shot, right, and they die. You get a balloon release. City pays for your funeral. Every year, you get a memory. But survivors, you get shot, they fix you up, and they kick you out the hospital and say, "Hey, you're normal again." But what is normal? What is survivors? We don't know what normal is. We belong to this club that we don't want to be a part of, but we have to be. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Obviously, it's very personal, and the trauma of being a victim, and then, as you mentioned, a survivor and leaving the hospital and being expected just to go back to normal life really doesn't make any sense. There's no reason that that would be the path that you would take. Of course, there are struggles that you would have afterward. So
Yes.
we appreciate you bringing light to that here on the podcast. We tend to focus on, or maybe the media tends to focus on, the number of deaths that we have related to shootings. We had Jennifer Massia from the Trace on a couple of weeks ago, and that was one thing that she was talking about. But we might see just a number, right? 2 or 4 or 10, or, unfortunately last week in Kansas City at the parade, 22
Yeah.
people injured, but their journey, their challenges are just starting.
Yes.
So, when we met initially, Devin and I were at the Center for American Progress conference in Washington, D.C., and Oronde was there presenting on the media and the media's influence and involvement with gun violence victims, survivors, their families within the community, and definitely opened our eyes up to some things that I certainly hadn't necessarily thought of. For instance, the loved ones of somebody who's been shot, finding out that that individual's been shot through the media, which is
Mm-hmm.
just really, really mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that you are doing important work at the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting. Can
Yes.
you tell us a little bit more about that? Give us some insight into what they focus on there.
Yeah, so it's three programs, and one of the programs that I got involved in was Credible Messenger program. Um, they actually give you a voice. They pair you up with a credible messenger. I mean, I'm sorry, a journalist, a professional partner, usually a journalist, a reporter, and I didn't have no experience at all. I didn't know what a documentary was, like how to put one together, and I was teamed up with Sherry Gregg, and I just wanted to exploit the media, exploit the city, and they taught me how to do a documentary, what to say and what not to say, the terms of the media, like for example, off the record, on the record, stuff like that. And we produced a documentary called "They Don't Care About Us," and it was wonderful. I interviewed survivors, politicians, because I wanted to know why nobody care about survivors. Nobody cared about survivors. And then when I was going along, politicians, doctors, psychiatrists, I found out later on their brother got shot, their uncles got shot, sisters got shot. That's why they're in this position of power, because they want to change it. So I was like, oh man, I felt like a fool, but the documentary went great. Now I'm the newsroom liaison. Um, I was from PCGVR, so I'm kicking down doors, Channel 3, Channel 6, Channel 10, and trying to change the narrative of the newsroom, because harmful reporting is really, really bad.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
don't get me wrong, the reporters, they have a job to do. It is not always their fault, because they have a job to do. If a story on their desk, they have to go cover it. They just don't know how harmful it is. 7 reporters knocking on a mother's door and they just lost somebody. So we're trying to change the narrative on how to approach a survivor, how to approach a co-victim. And we're doing excellent work. We just got some research going with Dr. Beard, like the credible messengers. And now I just accepted I'm a Stoneleigh fellow. So now I got this big project that I'm doing. PCGVR is my company also. So we're doing a directory of cities of Philadelphia, right? I got journalists and I got survivors. I'm bringing them together because, for example, like a couple weeks ago, a journalist called me and said, "Hey, Rondé, um, a 3-year-old just got shot." And I said, "Okay, well, this is in another part of town. Can you go with me, or can you tell me about it?" Like, what you mean? How can I can't help you with that. And it's bringing me back of all the traumas and triggers that I have. So now we're teaching survivors how to be credible messengers So we're creating the app and a website. So journalists will have. So say for instance, it was in KNA because it's in Allegheny. They will have 6, 7 credible measures they can call. They don't have to call me. So that's what we're doing so far, and we're training them also, and we're training journalists how to talk to survivors. So that's what we're doing so far.
And that makes a lot of sense, right? Journalists certainly have a job to do, but there's also a code of ethics that
Yeah.
you have to prescribe to as a
Mhm.
journalist. So that's really important for them to keep in mind, right? It's not just about getting the story.
Yeah.
It's about the people that you're telling the stories about.
And it's not a and it's like, well, you got this amazing story, right? Oh my God, you're the number one. You got the amazing story, but what about the follow up? You
Right.
don't have no follow up story. So as an audience, I got this 5-year-old guy that got shot, but we don't know what happened to him because there's
Right.
no follow up stories. You say he was in critical condition. 2 weeks, we want to know what happened to the person.
Right.
There's no follow up story and nothing like that. So we're trying to push that, and it's working also. Like we're seeing results.
And I'd kind of like to jump in here on a couple of the points you've raised. And one is kind of about the lack of care, as it were, for people who have survived gunshots. Most often, the focus is on those who have died, and there'll be the uh, media attention on those instances. For example, with the definition of mass shootings, the Gun Violence Archive treats them as 4 more people shot, recognizing that oftentimes the difference between life and death is a matter of millimeters. But some of the pushback to that is like, oh, we should only focus on cases where 4 or more are killed. And to me, that erases the victims of injuries who have all this trauma going forward, whose lives have been upended. And it's just like, oh, they were just injured, they'll be fine. And it's just kind of gross negligence in a way on the part of some. And it also appears on the data side as well. For example, like we do have firm figures from the CDC of how many people are killed from guns every year. We
Mm.
still do not have a firm figure for how many people are shot by guns each year. They come from just a survey of a handful of hospitals and then they extrapolate. And with all the resources, you'd think you'd be able to figure out how many people are actually shot, where, and to help provide the resources there. But even at the data level, there seems to be a systematic uncaring of people who are survivors. And I kind of want to tie that into an overarching question of what are some of the biggest harmful practices that you see in media coverage? And on the flip side, what are some of the improvements that you've seen recently and what you've been doing?
Okay, that's a great question. So the bad stuff we see, harmful, um, white sheets, uh, yellow tape, um, blood, and all the images that you see on the news can be triggering to somebody like myself or other survivors. Stuff that you see where they keep showing the suspect or the killer, or they say the person that was 31, but he was really 18. Stuff like that. Good stuff that we see, like for instance, one of the news stations, it had a bad image and a bad video, and PCGVR we call and they erased it. So they listening to us. It's like, okay, we see what y'all doing. We see what y'all about, and let's erase that. And they erased it.
Yeah,
And,
and that's
and
really,
it, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's very good that they're listening. It seems to be that it's more born out of ignorance and like a journalist's job, particularly in a modern media market is to get like clicks on the page. And
Mhm.
sometimes the drive to do that just overwhelms everything else. And it's good that they're realizing that, like, oh, I shouldn't be doing these certain practices and holding
Yeah,
that.
and they listen. They listening to us. They're talking to us. They letting us in their newsroom. Well, what survivor you know are going to newsrooms to try to change the narrative? What company? Like PCGVR is really putting the work in newsrooms. So
You mentioned the Stoneleigh Foundation in your
yes.
early on. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to share with our listeners about the Stoneleigh Foundation, the work that they do, the work you're doing with them. I don't know all that much about them, so I'm certainly interested to
Oh
learn more
yeah.
as well.
So the Stoneleigh Foundation, they have a couple fellows, and one of them was myself. And they're doing gun violence prevention. And my project got picked.
Oh,
So like I
fantastic.
said, yeah. So I said earlier is I'm doing a directory in Philadelphia, and they're sponsoring that for the next 2 years. Um, I'm putting journalists and survivors together so they can learn from one another and learn how to talk from one another. And we're having classes. One of the first class will be March 18th, and we'll be paying survivors like for their time because a lot of people don't do that. They don't give them no stipend or anything like that, and we're giving them an opportunity to speak to journalists to see what's going on, how they can work on each other. And you'll have a lot of credible messengers in areas. So, for example, say if you a journalist and you be like, "Oh, I have something going on this block," rather than you rushing to the person's house, you got 4 or 5 credible messages that you can call and see what's going on. So,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, having sort of a buffer between
yeah,
the journalist and somebody who may not want to speak to them, may be grieving, whatever the situation is. I think
yes,
that's really brilliant.
yes.
And whenever you're done with that directory, feel free to pass it along to us. And if we can be if we can be of any assistance getting it out
Okay,
to folks
cool.
too, we're always happy to help.
We was just at y'all in Washington, right?
Yes.
We was just in NBC4 talking about it.
Oh, okay.
We was at NBC4, and we have a a documentary, a new documentary called Second Trauma, where I interview you know, people that lost loved ones, survivors, and they really tell the media, y'all need to stop what y'all doing and focus on us. And it's really amazing. And we're going to colleges, we're going to different cities on it. It's really, really phenomenal.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'd like to touch on is you had mentioned your mentoring work. And I'm really interested in that, particularly how you've been in the past mentoring teens who have been arrested. And one of the common lines from pro-gun advocates tends to be lumping all gun violence that occurs in cities such as Philadelphia as, and I do hesitate to use these terms, and if you're not watching the video, I'm using air quotes here, but gang violence or even the work of thugs, with the implication that those lives that are being lost or altered forever are worth less than other people who live elsewhere. And this is even used to throw doubt on guns being the number one killer of children and teens. I've seen in so many social media commentaries where they're like, "Oh yes, but that includes these gangbangers from cities, and therefore those shouldn't count towards the statistic," which is, I mean, to me, just galling. But I was wondering if you could talk about your experience during the mentoring work and how that may challenge those talking points
Yeah,
that
so
so
this
often come up.
okay, sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And this don't have nothing to do with PGVR, This was with the McClain Foundation. We was mentoring young teenagers that had gun charges, and people are people. Humans are humans. And that's another thing: harmful reporting, harmful language, thugs, and that's people are still people. You have to sit down with the person and let them know what's going on. Because especially teenagers, I had a couple teenagers. They was just carrying guns because they want to protect themselves because they saw their father get killed. They saw their best friends get killed. So we have to sit down and figure out what actually is the issue.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion, and I don't label anybody. I call everybody by their first name. So if we start doing that, I think the violence will go down.
Yeah.
Would you say, I know you mentioned that there was an instance where a photo was put up and it was triggering to victims. You asked for it to be taken down and it was taken down, which is obviously progress. But would you say when you meet with journalists, a majority of them are interested at changing their vocabulary if they're using words that they shouldn't, or they're interested in the feedback, or is there some hesitation there in the field?
Um, like I said, we all humans. Everybody's gonna step back a little bit, but we making progress. People are really interested of what they have to say. I've been in every newsroom. Nobody giving me a pushback. They listen. I don't know if they're going to use it all the time, but they able to listen. So I think that's progress. Nobody said, no, you know what? I don't want to do that. I'm going to change. I'm going to just keep doing what I'm doing. No, I don't think it's like that. People are seeing progress. So they say, hey, okay, we're going to make a change. Their change might say, okay, we're not going to call them victims. We'll call them survivors. But a small change will work. So,
Yeah. And I'll be interested to see kind of how, as your program expands, because I find it hard to believe that it won't expand because it seems like such an obvious win-win for both
mhm.
survivors to get their stories out and for the media to properly cover these instances and have on-call experts basically who are willing to walk them through instances. Like I definitely see that expanding across the country. And
Yeah.
I'll be interested to see whether there's how much of a regional difference there might be. I'm based in Oklahoma,
Oh,
and
wow.
our news coverage, as
Yeah.
one might expect, is not the greatest on these issues, and whether there might be more pushback from, like, honestly, deep red conservative states
Yeah.
who are very much entrenched in a certain narrative versus areas that are more definitely more willing to listen and be empathetic towards survivors.
Yeah. It's going to change, but you still got to be honest with my company. Like we need the funding as well. So if the funding stop, it won't be no change. But I think everybody, like, when gun violence hit home, it's going to change. I mean, it's going to change, and I have hope for the future. I think it's hitting home, especially in Philadelphia. It's going to change, and when people see like the second trauma and other cities that we go talk about and talk to, like the young kids, the young college kids, it's going to change because
Well,
they're the future. Go ahead.
yes, they certainly are the future. Since you mentioned the financial piece, we wanted to ask you how our listeners can find your work and if they'd like to support your efforts. Is there any way for them to do that?
Oh yeah, PCGVR.org. And it's a donate button on the homepage, and that's PCGVR.org. Or you can find me, and that's Oronde McClain. on Facebook, Instagram, and I can point them to PCGVR.
Perfect. Yeah,
Awesome.
when we share this post out on our Substack and on social media, we'll make sure to include all those
Okay.
links for everyone.
Oh,
One kind of final question to wrap up. You mentioned colleges are well, previously you had mentioned going to like already established journalists. I was curious whether there have been efforts to go into like journalism classes.
oh yeah.
Instead.
So I've been at Temple journalism classes. We just left forgive me, I forgot the name of it. It was in Washington. I forgot the name of it. Man, they gonna kill me. But we in journalism schools. So
Fantastic.
Good, right. Set the expectation
yeah,
early, right? That
yes.
makes a lot of sense.
Yes. And
Oh,
I can send you all the trailer of Second Trauma and see how y'all like it. And y'all can
oh
submit it
yes.
to
Yes, absolutely. We would love to get that out to folks too.
okay.
So thank you again for joining us here today. Any
Okay.
last thoughts that you have that you would like to leave with us?
No, everybody just, if you see a survivor or a co-victim, give them a hug for me.
Yeah.
Just be kind to each other, That's what it is. And I think the world forgot about that.
Yes, put that on a bumper sticker. That's very
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
Well, again, we are so grateful for you coming on here and sharing your personal story about your struggles, not only with your injury from the shooting, but your mental health struggles afterwards. You know,
Mhm.
your bravery and your hard work does not go unnoticed, and I am absolutely sure that you have changed
Thanks.
countless lives. So
Hope
it's
so.
yes, I know so. I know so. Devin knows so too. I don't usually like speaking for him, but in this case I will. So, but we hope to hear from you soon. Please keep us up to date with what work you're doing, and you're always welcome here on the podcast if you'd like to jump on and give us another update. Tell us what's happening.
All right, thanks. I appreciate it. And
Of
I'm gonna definitely
course.
send you that trailer.
Okay, perfect. All
Thank you
right.
so much.
Thank you so
All right.
much.
All right.